So I swipe left to right, right to left. Okay. So we're going to talk again about raising healthy monarchs at home. But this is the more advanced course. So while I will be discussing some of the things that we talked about the last time, there will be a lot of new information too. So from the time of conception, and you can see what is happening here. I was in the butterfly house at the Science Center. And this pair just kind of flew over. He dragged her over and sat on the back of my hand, and there they were. So there were a lot of people that said, don't you think that's really gross? And I'm going, no, I think it's actually kind of cool. But here they are mating on the back of my hand. When they mate, they'll stay together from one afternoon to the next. And in the morning, you know, about up to 16 hours. Females usually start laying eggs about, well, almost immediately after they're eclosed. And both sexes can mate several times during their lifetime. The females will lay from 300 to 500 eggs during the lifetime, but they have laid as many as 1,000 or 1,100, so they may lay more than 100 a day. So what we want to do is go from this, whoops, wrong way. All right, I think I've got it now. Let's turn off my video, Katie. So what you want is a beautiful batch of healthy monarchs. These are some that I had raised at home, and we took them out and put them in a field, and they just kind of stayed there and didn't even want to leave. But there's a lot of steps in between the first slide you saw and this slide. Nothing is wanting to work tonight. Okay. First of all, like I said before, we need a lot of milkweed. And when I say a lot of milkweed, I really do mean a lot of milkweed. This is the common milkweed that grows in my front yard. It has been spreading pretty well. So next year, I'll probably have a lot more plants than this, just of the common milkweed. And I also keep usually between 150 and 200 annual milkweeds, the hairy balls. This is the most common milkweed. About every place you see around North Carolina or along the highways and stuff that has any milkweed growing at all that's wild, it is probably going to be this common milkweed. It's one of about 115 species that are native to the US. So you see it a lot along roadsides. The leaves are big and they'll feed a lot of caterpillars. So that's the good thing about it. The flowers have a really pretty scent. There's like something between a rose and a lily. The leaves and stems of these are very sticky when you get the sap. So if you're using, you know, pruners or whatever from your regular garden equipment, you want to be sure to wash the sap off as soon as you're done with it, because if you don't, then it's going to get really sticky and you can't get it off. So once the sap is dry, it's not such a problem. You know, it just, well, I should, if you, oh, never mind. Let me take that sentence out to a tailor. I'm just still having trouble with my equipment here. So always remember to wash your hands. We talked about that last time, because if you get any of the sap in your eyes, it can cause blindness. And if you have a lot of allergies, like some people do, then, you know, just go ahead and wear gloves anytime you're working around the milkweed. Okay, we're getting better here. So one of the biggest problems with milkweed is aphids. And people will see them and say, well, they're just aphids. They don't really hurt your plant. These are all over my beautiful hairy balls. And this wasn't nearly as bad as they got the year after I took this picture. But they do actually hurt your plant. They will just suck all of the sap out of it, and it will just start wilting. Most people think, you know, that they're just kind of distasteful, but, you know, they're more than that. They're a genuine pest when it comes to raising milkweed. So they suck the sap out of your leaves and they leave honeydew. Now, the problem with honeydew is it attracts ants. And what the ants do is they come up and they milk the aphids for more honeydew. So they do a little aphid farming, which only causes the aphids to reproduce. And once they do that, when the sun starts coming out, then you get this sooty mold. And the sooty mold, when it gets on there enough, can actually block photosynthesis, and then you just lose the whole plant. It's worse than just having it covered with the honeydew. So this is what I tell people about aphids, is you've got to remember that they, in a perfect world, will just reproduce like mad. One female can give birth to 80 little aphids in a week. In a perfect world where there were no aphid parasites, diseases, predators, that sort of stuff, one aphid over a season could produce 600 billion aphids. So the way they reproduce is just astronomical. There's just absolutely no way to keep up with it. But at least for us, we can be thankful that it's not a perfect world for aphids. They do have a lot of predators. They've got a lot of pests that bother them. It's not always the way they would like it to be either, because, you know, they've got ladybugs, they've got trash bugs, they've got lacewings, they've got all of that stuff that feed on them, hoverflies and all that sort of stuff. So what do you do about aphids? What I do with them mostly is I start as soon as I see them. You don't want to wait and give them time to start producing all over the place. And I rinse them off and squish them, or squish them and rinse them off. You've got to be careful with some of your varieties of milkweed that you don't spray it too hard and damage your leaves. But for the most part, it works really well. And the theory is that their little legs are so spindly that if you wash them off into the soil, they can't crawl back up the plant. I don't know that I actually believe that, but that's what I've been told. So you can do some companion planting. You can put in chives and marigolds and lavender, onions, all of the things like that, mint, basil, rue. And if you want plants to just attract them so that they live someplace else other than on your milkweed, they like sunflowers. And I'm trying to think what the other one is. It'll come to me eventually. But so there are several ways you can combat them, but you're probably not going to get rid of them. If it's not in monarch season yet, you can use insecticidal soap. Just 1 tablespoon of liquid to a quart of water, put it in a sprayer and spray your leaves, and it'll kill your aphids. But be sure and wash it off good. And once the monarchs come in and start laying eggs, don't be using insecticidal soap at all. Another one of our favorite ones, and these just go for the seed pods. These are the milkweed bugs. They don't bother the plants at all, but they get into the milkweed pods and they eat all your seeds. I always encourage people to gather as many seeds as they can, spread them around in fields where there's no milkweed growing, any open area that you can put seeds in, and give them to people. Make little packets of them, put them in your Christmas cards. You know, offer them on monarch pages on the internet or on Facebook. So you can just send them to people who don't have access to milkweed seeds easily. And the other way you can protect your milk, I do the same thing with milkweed bugs a lot that I do with aphids. I squish them and rinse them. But you can also get these cute little organza bags, and they're very inexpensive. I think they're like $7 a hundred or whatever. Tie them over your seed pods, and that will keep the milkweed bugs out of them. So it's just another way to go about it. The best way to collect seeds is to get them when they are like the picture on the left. That way you can just kind of scrape them off into a container, and you don't get so much of the fluff. That's a hairy balls in that picture. The one on the right is just a common milkweed, and you can see it's already popped, and there's seeds going all over the place, and all the fluff is popped out too. So what you do if that's your situation is you put them in a plastic box or a paper bag or something, not the pod, not the shell of the pod, but all of the fluff and seeds, and shake it with some coins. And the coins will knock most of the fluff off, and the rest of them you can just pick off. But it really does a pretty good job of cleaning them up. Another insect that can damage your plants is the milkweed beetle, not to be confused with a milkweed bug, although, you know, red and orange and black is a big thing in the milkweed gardens. On the left is one that's, it's probably in about a third instar. On the right is the one that is the adult. And you can see if you look on that left-hand picture next to that larva or instar, there's a big chunk of leaf that's missing. The first time I saw this happen, I thought it looked like caterpillar damage from the monarchs, but I didn't have any caterpillars. But that was before I found out about the milkweed beetles. So this is the damage they do, and they can just chew down your whole plant till there's nothing left. So you've got your healthy milkweed going. And it's time to watch for your mama monarch to come around and lay the eggs. And we talked about this before. She will usually lay them on the bottom of the leaf. They're very tiny. As you can see, these are very small leaves, and there's one egg on each leaf section usually. If they have a shortage of milkweed, then they may lay a whole bunch on there, but usually you'll just find one egg, maybe two per leaf. So they're just tiny little eggs. What can possibly go wrong? Oh, so many things. So on the left, you will see a trichogramma wasp. And it is laying its eggs inside these tiny little milkweed eggs. And on the right, this is what they will start looking like. They will have like a little leopard print. And as many as 30 of these little wasps have been found riding around on just one caterpillar, or one butterfly. So you can imagine, again, how fast they reproduce and how invasive they can be. So they'll ride around on the female monarch and just wait for her to lay her eggs. The wasp will emerge in about 10 days. So if you have eggs that haven't hatched in about 5 days or less, then take a good look at them. And if you see these little spots, you know your eggs aren't going to hatch, and you're going to want to destroy them before these things hatch out. But if you look closely at your egg and you just see this black spot on top, there's nothing wrong with your egg, because that's the head of the caterpillar. So that means it is going to hatch. As soon as they hatch, the little teeny caterpillar, which is very, very small, is going to turn around and eat its little eggshell. That's the first meal they have, full of proteins and all the good things they need to start their life. And I think we used this picture before too, but just to show it to you again, that they're only about the size of the head of a pin as far as their length goes. They're about 1/16 of an inch. And on that picture on the right, that one that is crawling off the leaf, that one is brand new hatch. So the body on him is going to be about the size of the body of a straight pin. So they're just really tiny little things, and you have to look carefully to find them. If you need to move them for one reason or another, like I obviously needed to move some of these because there are just too many of them on one leaf, but you can't pick them up or you're going to have squishing incidents, which is never good. So you can just use a teeny tiny little watercolor brush, slide the tip of the bristles underneath your little bitty caterpillar, move him, and then just slide the brush out from under him. And this is absolutely the easiest and safest way to do it. So now you have your box full of tiny little cats in your house. So we'll talk about some of the weird things that can happen. Caterpillars. Caterpillars are very picky. They don't like herbicides, pesticides. If you have a dog or cat that is on flea and tick prevention, be sure you wash your hands before you get close to your caterpillars. They don't like strong cleaning products, perfume, hairspray, sunscreen, hand lotion. Any of the stuff that you see on this list does not really come into my house during butterfly season. If it smells good or it smells bad, it doesn't come into my butterfly area, because all of these things are toxic to the caterpillars. So back to taking care of them. Once you've got them, you have to remember that there are 5 different instars, and between each instar, they're going to molt. Now, this is a really critical time for them, and I keep seeing people on the Monarch Butterfly page on Facebook, and these people just drive me crazy because they go, oh, there's something wrong with it, so I just poked it to see if it moved or whatever. And no matter how many times you tell them, leave it alone, they still want to try to move it around. So when you see them doing this, and they'll usually be in a vertical position on the side of their enclosure, just leave them alone. And they may stay there for 24, even 48 hours. I had one that actually stayed in the top of the enclosure for 2 weeks. Don't know anybody that's ever had that happen. So you do not disturb them. So what's going to happen? When they are ready to molt, you will see the face change. If you look at them very closely, it looks like their face cap isn't big enough. And you will see their new face coming in. That's the yellow part. And the black part will drop off. That is the old face cap. So this may take a full 2 to 3 days to complete. Usually if the weather's warm, it doesn't take them that long. So when they're done, you'll see these tiny little face caps laying in the bottom of your enclosure. They're really pretty cool looking. So you'll know whether they've molted or not. So now you've got them all molted and everything seems like it's going well. But there are still so many things that can go wrong. Here on the left, we have one of a infamous paper wasp, which I never had any problem with in Florida, but they're all over the place here in North Carolina. And you can see where he's after this poor little caterpillar. That green drop on the left side is hemolymph, which is the insect equivalent of blood. But they don't have to be big wasp nests. The one on the right belongs to a potter's wasp. This thing is less than ½ an inch in diameter, and it just looks like a little clay pot. So what they do with this is the wasp will go out and it will paralyze the caterpillar and bring it back and stuff it into this tiny little nest for its own larva to feed on. But we also have to remember that we don't want to indiscriminately kill wasps because they're also good pollinators. So everything has its place. Another one of the really bad predators for the caterpillars are anything related to the stink bugs, army bugs, soldier bugs, all of those things. And even a tiny little stink bug like this will parasitize a great big, or prey on a great big caterpillar. It took this one a full 48 hours before he drained that caterpillar dry. It was just awful to watch. So again, you can keep your garden free of debris because they like to hide in leaves and mulch and all of that sort of thing. You can do companion planting. They don't like things like okra, mustard, sunflowers, amaranth. It might help deter them, or you can give them something else to focus on. Or you can also plant mint, lavender, garlic, marigold, thyme, and you can get commercial traps, but I don't go to that kind of lengths. This year I had a lot fewer milkweed plants in my garden, and I hardly saw any stink bugs. And oddly enough, we had a really low year for aphids this year. Last year we were just flooded with them, and this year I had very few. So I don't know whether it was the weather or what it was. They also have other hazards. The tachinid fly. This one is just really bad. You can see on this caterpillar on the right-hand slide, the tiny little fly eggs on the outside of the caterpillar. And they will hatch and burrow into the caterpillar where their larva will eat the inside out of the caterpillar. And of course, it kills it. Sometimes they will hatch out of the caterpillar, which you can see on that left-hand slide, that little protrusion that is hanging there from that thread on the left, that's the tachinid fly larva. And in the chrysalids, if you just see that little silk strand, you know that you're going to have those fly larvae. So be sure to look at the bottom of your enclosure and make sure they're not there. Pick up any of the larvae that you find and destroy them, and just destroy the chrysalis too, just in case they haven't started spinning down yet. So to prevent this, you want to raise only eggs and first instar caterpillars. If you left any of them out in your garden until they're bigger, you have a higher chance of getting the tea fly in them. But you shouldn't be raising a lot of them anyway. I used to think that you raise as many as you can and put that many more into the environment to go on and reproduce, but I've found out since that that's not a good idea. I used to raise hundreds of them, and now I hardly raise any, because what you're doing is you're flooding the environment with monarchs that there is no food for. So they end up starving to death, and you don't want to do that. So I go with the Xerxes Society's recommendation of only raising, like 10 or 12, just to be able to see how the process is, to show them to other people and teach them how important they are, but not to be flooding the area with all sorts of caterpillars that aren't going to have anything to eat. So if you do decide to collect larger cats, be sure to wash all of your leaves before you put them in the enclosure, and wash your milkweed cuttings and control your aphids and prevent the honeydew so that you don't get all of the other problems that go with them. I raise all of mine inside. I don't raise any outside. Black Death. This is one that is a real hot topic on the Monarch page. And this is one that, again, sort of drives me crazy, because we have a few people on there who think that they're an expert on NPV, which is a virus that does attack the monarch caterpillars. And every time they see a caterpillar that turns black, they go, oh no, you have to sterilize your enclosure. You have to kill all your other caterpillars. You've got to get rid of everything and just start all over again. Well, no, that's not really the case. NPV is very rare in domestically or in hand-reared butterflies, caterpillars. About the only time you'll actually run into NPV is if your environment is really moist or if it's overcrowded. And then you might start seeing it. Otherwise, you're not going to. Now, the way to tell, because this can also be caused by bacterial infections too. And still, you don't have to destroy everything and start over. When I find them like this, I just pluck them very carefully off the top of my enclosure and remove them. Now, if I should rupture one, then yeah, I'm going to take the rest of the caterpillars out, clean everything, and then put them back with fresh milkweed. But if I can get them down very gently, and usually I can, it's never been a problem before, just take them out and get rid of them. If you do get an outbreak of NPV, the way that you can tell that that's what you've got is that it will send up a really bad stench. You'll know immediately that you've got NPV in your enclosure. And yes, then everybody has to be destroyed. You cannot keep the other caterpillars because they're going to have it. So you have to clean everything with bleach after you get the caterpillars out. But like I said, it's very rare. Of all the hundreds of butterflies I've raised from caterpillars, I have never once seen actual NPV. This is the kind of setup I use to raise mine. Once they get big enough that they can't get through the holes in the netting. You can get these from garden shops or whatever, and it has a finer mesh, which you absolutely need if you're going to raise them outside. I raise all mine inside, so I just get laundry hampers from Walmart. They're a fraction of the price. And it works really well because they've got 2 zippers. Because no matter what, you're always going to find one of your caterpillars that wants to pupate on a zipper. And if you've only got 1 zipper, there's just no way to get in there. So I get these with the 2 zippers and I raise all of mine inside, and that way I don't have a problem. I never put more than 20 caterpillars, big caterpillars, in one of these big enclosures because I don't want them getting overcrowded. And these give you real good air circulation too, so that helps them keep safe. If they start running low on food or if they get overcrowded, then they get cranky. And you may see some of them with bite marks because they will get into fights. And it doesn't seem to matter how much food you've got in there. There's always going to be 6 of them that want the same leaf. So then they'll start biting at each other and you'll get these little scars. It is not going to hurt your caterpillar. In the long run, they're going to eclose into a perfectly beautiful butterfly. So just, it's not anything to work with or worry about. And the bigger they get, the more they eat. The little ones don't eat much. You can give them a couple of little leaves and they'll be good for days. But on the left is a plant that I had on my patio, and it had about a handful of about 4th instar caterpillars on it. And 2 days later, you see the same plant on the right. So when I say that they eat a lot, they eat a lot. Fortunately, a lot of these milkweed plants will regenerate really quickly, so it's not a big issue. So you just take them and put them inside where the monarchs can't continue to lay eggs on them and just make the matters worse, and you substitute some fresh plants. Just to remind you of the different instar sizes, down in that bottom right-hand corner, you see the first instar. Each one gets a little bit bigger, and they always molt in between. That last big one is your 5th instar, and that one is a real chunky little guy, and he's about ready to pupate. One of the sure clues that you can look for to find out if it's a 4 or 5, because it is very difficult to tell, are these 2 filaments on the front. The 4th instars will have them long enough that they will touch down on the leaf in front of them, but the 5th instars tend to keep them just moving back and forth on your milkweed plant because they use them to find food or to make sure that the leaf that they're on is appropriate for eating. And once they start that movement back and forth in a kind of continuous basis, you can be pretty sure you've got a 5th instar, and you can start waiting for it to pupate. So when they start to pupate, you see this strange looking situation. If you've got, I took these through a clear, more or less clear top, so you can see what that silk button looks like. And it's really interesting that they spin this from the front of the caterpillar. I used to think that it spun from the back of the caterpillar, but they actually spin it out in the front and then turn around and attach their back into it. But it is a very heavy duty silk pad, and it's surprising how hard it is to dislodge. The only time usually that you're going to have trouble with them dropping is if there is something wrong with the caterpillar, or if you've got too much humidity in the air and it loosens your silk. So this is another reason for having them in those aerated tents rather than in something enclosed like this. It only takes them a few minutes to go from the J, and they will stay in that J shape for usually right around 24 hours. I'm going to go back to that other slide for just a minute. You can tell when they're just about ready to pupate, because in that slide on the right, you see those front filaments are like little corkscrews. And you know, if you want to see it, you better not take your eye off of it, or you're gonna miss it. I think in total it takes about 5 minutes or less before they go from not having any green on them at all to being fully formed. So it's a very fast process. Once you see that first hint of green coming out of the back of their head, they go very quickly. It will only take a few minutes. Oops. And no matter how much room you have in your enclosure, they are all going to want to pupate in the same place. I mean, this is a big enclosure. They could go all over so that there's, 3 or 4 inches between each of them. But no, they all want to be there together. It's like they know that they're going into something new and different and scary. So they all want each other for moral support. So they all go into the corner of the tent, and there they are. So sometimes they'll get close enough like this. Now, these two were really buddied up, right up against each other. Can't do a thing about them. And I never move them when they're in their J position. I know a lot of people that do, but I think that's just asking for trouble. So I waited. And sure enough, there are their chrysalids right next to each other. I mean, literally bumping up against each other. You'll see a little brown spot on that one on the left. No problem with that kind of thing. So I waited 24 hours until they'd had plenty of time to harden. And then I took them down and relocated them. So it's really pretty easy to relocate them if you need to. You can see at the top of that picture where one of them is pulling down just a little bit the silk from the plastic top of that enclosure. So just go ahead and pull that silk down. I use tweezers and just grab onto the silk right at the top of the cremaster and pull it down, kind of ball it up, and then tie a thread or a piece of unflavored dental floss or whatever around it. And then you can tape it up wherever you want it to hang. So these are the same two. I took them down. One of them pulled away from its silk entirely. So that gives you a little bit different situation. So what you can do is get a low temperature hot glue gun and put just a tiny bit of hot glue on the tip of the cremaster, and then use that to tie your thread and to hold it in place. And that way you can tape it up to your enclosure. The hot glue, as long as you don't put it actually on the chrysalis, is not going to hurt anything. I've done it hundreds of times. So when you tape them in place, you want to tape them as closely as possible to whatever it is that you're taping them to. I see people again online who do not understand that this is an important thing that you're doing. It may be a hobby, but it's not a game. These are not toys. I see people with cute little earring trees, and they've got their chrysalis hanging down, 3 or 4 inches of thread in between it and whatever it's hanging to, just dangling around like little Christmas ornaments. And I go, no, because when they come out, they need that chrysalis to be steady so they can climb back up and hang on and spread their wings. Now, one thing you want to remember is that you never have your chrysalids where they can eclose over your grazing butterflies. So you want to keep your chrysalids in a completely different container than where your caterpillars are. Because if you have one that ecloses and it's got OE, and you've got it in an enclosure with your caterpillars and with the food, then they may very well get contaminated too. This is what an OE butterfly typically looks at. The wings will be shrunken and misshapen. The belly will not be used to inflate the wings like it usually does, and it's just a really sad situation. It is not a viable butterfly. Again, there are people who keep these butterflies as pets. And don't do that. This is not the way it's supposed to be for butterflies. You're not supposed to be keeping them as pets and feeding them with a Q-tip and all of that nonsense. Just realize this is part of the cycle of life and put the butterfly out of its misery. This is a particularly dire case of OE. And I should probably remind you that OE is carried by the female monarchs. It is a protozoan that they carry on their bodies, and when they fly over the milkweed, they sprinkle it like pixie dust. The caterpillars will eat the spores, which will then form inside the caterpillar. And when your monarch ecloses, then it is already on its way out for the most part. There are some that will have so few spores that you don't see any difference. It looks like a healthy butterfly. And that's why I tell everybody to check every butterfly before they release it. And it's not hard to do. But this is a particularly bad case of OE, and you can tell from the discoloration of the body, there is practically no wings, nothing is working. So how do you know? What do you do? I don't know why this is in here. Oh, well, sometimes you can tell from the color of the chrysalis. If the color is off, you can tell this is not a healthy chrysalis. Also, though this can also be to kind of fly, the tea fly, or it can be a virus or a bacteria or something else, but this can also be OE. Anytime you see a chrysalis that looks like this, it is probably not going to be a viable butterfly. I always encourage people, to put it someplace by itself and wait and see what happens until because sometimes they'll fool you and they'll be okay. So if you're not sure about whether or not your butterfly has OE, this is how you check for it. And I have started doing this with every butterfly that I release. And you don't have to wear gloves to do this. I don't. It's really easy as a two-person job, but it's not too bad as one. So you hold it and put the body out where it is free from the wings of the butterfly. Get a piece of cellophane tape, and you don't want to use the frosted tape because it makes the spores much harder to see. And just touch the tape to the abdomen of the butterfly and kind of pat it down very gently, and then just pull it away. And what you should see on the left there is that's what it looks like when you get the spores on your piece of tape. And this is a really good sample. So you put your sample onto a piece of white paper, and you can use a magnifier that is like a 60 times power. I use a better one than that because my eyes are not like they were 50 years ago. This is what happens when you get old. You need a stronger magnification. That sounds like an expensive and just tedious prospect, but it really goes very quickly. And you can get very inexpensive little tiny microscopes for $15 online. So it's not a big deal. Katie and I can test 10 monarchs in 10 minutes. It's that fast. We've got a system for doing it. If you're doing it by yourself, you can probably test 10 of them in 5 minutes. So this is what you're looking for. The big things you see there are the healthy scales. All those tiny little kind of football-shaped dots, those are all OE spores. And then kind of comes the judgment call. Now, this is a pretty heavy infestation. This is not going to be a viable butterfly. So it is going to have to be euthanized if it is even in any condition at all to fly. If you see just a few spores, then it's probably going to be okay. It's not going to have enough to be a disease or parasitic problem for the other butterflies, and you can go ahead and release it. But like I said, it's kind of a judgment call. However, since I've started raising mine just from eggs indoors, I have raised over 800 without a single case of OE. Well, what kind of other issues can you run into? Sometimes when they're molting, they can get stuck. This is usually caused by low humidity, and you'll see them get partway out, and then it's like they just can't get the rest of that skin off. So what you do is you just take a mist bottle of water and you just spray them a little bit to kind of moisten the skin and see if they can wriggle out of it. If they can't and you have to move them, just move them to like a white paper towel. We never use newspaper or anything that has newsprint, inks, whatever. So just a clean white paper towel and put them on there with a little water and see if that will give them enough friction that they can get out of their skin. If that doesn't work, you have to kind of go for the harder option, which is something like taking a pair of tweezers and just pulling very gently at the skin that is stuck, or a seam ripper, which looks really dangerous, but as long as you take that ball end of it and slide it right under the skin, between the skin and the caterpillar, you're not going to hurt it. You just have to be careful. And that way you can cut through the stuck skin and remove that with your tweezers. So suppose you have some milkweed from your favorite big box store, because, well, you know, it had caterpillars on it, so it must be okay. Well, that's not necessarily the way it is. They will very often use pesticides or herbicides or whatever within the store, or that may even be where they were raising the milkweed, and the caterpillar doesn't show any signs. So just because you see healthy looking caterpillars on a milkweed plant doesn't mean that the milkweed is safe. This is why I raise all of my own milkweed. So what happens is you see your poor caterpillar, he's writhing around on the bottom of his cage, and he's either got diarrhea or he's vomiting, and that's what all the green stuff is around him. But you have a chance if you catch this early enough. What you do is you take him and you rinse him off under running water, and then just gently pat him dry and put him back in an enclosure with fresh milkweed that you know is clean, and he will probably be okay if you catch him early enough. If not, you've got nothing to lose. Some people like to put their milkweed cuttings in their enclosures in a vase of water or whatever. And first of all, I don't find this necessary. They eat through the leaves so fast, I don't need to keep them in water. In fact, I would just be pulling stems out all the time and replacing them. If you do feel like you have to keep them in water, then get the florist tubes that have the little stoppers that you can put the leaves in that don't leak any water. Because if you put them in a vase or a cup of water or whatever, sure enough, one of your caterpillars is going to manage to fall in your cup. So here you have your caterpillar laying at the bottom of your cup where you've got your milkweed and your water. And guess what? They can't swim. I've seen them try. When we lived in Florida, we had a pool. They were always falling into the pool or puddles of rainwater or whatever. So if you're lucky and you get to it in time, you can fix the drowning caterpillar. So you take him out, you cover him with table salt. Just completely bury him in a layer of table salt. Wait, keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best. And you may get some vomiting because, you know, they've got all this extra water and stuff, but the table salt will dehydrate them and pull that extra water out. And if you see them crawling out of your table salt, then just go rinse them off, pat them dry, and put them back where they belong. And you've rescued your drowning caterpillar. CPR, caterpillar pulmonary resuscitation. So now they've gotten this far and it's ready to pupate. And it gets this far and then it just stops. And you go, now what? Well, this is a deadly situation and there is nothing you can do to fix it. There are several reasons for failure to pupate. And most of mine will get just about this far before they fail. And what happens is usually there has been some sort of growth inhibitor put on the milkweed, somebody has sprayed something, or they haven't had enough food and they've pupated too early. So that will cause them to have a failure to pupate. The worst one that I've ever had was this last summer. And this was really awful. And I have never seen anything like this because this one made it all the way to forming the top of it by the cremaster. But there were these areas that were just completely constricted. He's still got a bunch of his skin left. There's just all sorts of deformities on this failure to pupate. And I've never seen anything like this happen. And I always thought that the caterpillar died just as soon as they ran into a failure to pupate. So I knew I wanted to get a picture of this because it was just such a rare occurrence. So I took it out and I put it aside on a piece of paper toweling, and I had some other things that I had to get done. Went back at least an hour later, and as I was zooming in on it with my camera, I saw the heartbeat. In that area there that is most constricted, that's kind of that translucent yellow color, it was just like a very thin membrane, and I could see his little heart beating. And it was going so fast, and ordinarily they will only have a heart rate of about 30 beats per minute. So, I mean, you know this little guy is struggling and his heart's beating like a rabbit. And I felt so bad for having left him there like that for a couple of hours while I went and did things that seemed to be more important at the time. So I will never do that again. Usually once they start to eclose, everything is fine. Again, not always, there's always exceptions. This one you can see is kind of stuck in his chrysalis. I mean, his belly is still in there, his wings are draped down over his head, and he's just in a mess. So what you would do is kind of like the same thing with the getting stuck in the molt, is go ahead and spray the chrysalis with some water with a fine mist, and just give it a few minutes, not very long. You don't want them to stay like this very long. If it hasn't dropped down by then, go ahead and take some tweezers and your seam cutter or whatever and break up that piece of chrysalis. The one thing about spraying it with the water is it will soften it and it will make it easier to pull away from the butterfly. The butterfly still may not survive, but if it does, just take it and, put it someplace where it can hang on and let its wings dry, because it's not going to have the chrysalis to hang on to anymore. Be sure with a caterpillar that does something like this that you always check it for OE. I know I keep saying that, but it's important. Okay, the proboscis. Usually the first thing that they will start working on is zipping their proboscis. When they come out of their chrysalis, it's split. You can see, oh, this is Pixie on the right, and you can see where her proboscis is still split into two little curls. Well, if it stays split like that, they can't eat. So usually they will start, as soon as they eclose, using those labial palps, which are the kind of fuzzy looking things on that picture on the left. They look almost like little brushes right there next to the proboscis. And they will start working their proboscis back and forth until it zips. But sometimes it still doesn't. So watch it, and if 10 minutes or more goes by and they still haven't been able to zip their proboscis, you may need to give them some help. So what you can do is you can get something like a paper clip. It's a little hard to see on this picture, but right there at the top, you see what looks like the paper clip, and it's just got a little hook on one end. So you can put that little bent hook inside the curled part of the proboscis and just keep pulling it out and letting it go back, pull it out and let it go back, and just keep doing that until it zips. You can also sometimes use a cotton swab that's been dipped in some honey or sugar solution like you use to feed hummingbirds with, and just work the proboscis back and forth with that. And the nectar itself may give them a little more motivation to keep working on that proboscis. And usually you can get it to go ahead and zip. Sometimes they will eclose and have funky wings for no particular reason. This is Dirk. He was in my last presentation, but I'm going to tell you a little more about him this time. And you can see where he eclosed with two funky wings. And naturally, the first thing I did was test him for OE, and he didn't have it. So I knew this could be done, but I'd never tried it before, and I just had to try it. And it is a really interesting thing to do. I did a double wing replacement. I just happened to have, by sheer luck, a pair of left-sided monarch wings, because everybody keeps their drawer full of them. And you can actually order monarch wings for doing this kind of thing with, if you're that into it. I'll probably never do it again, but I wanted to try it and see what happens. So this is what you do. First of all, you're going to have to keep your butterfly from moving all over the place. If you take a wire coat hanger and just kind of bend the top down so it sort of fits around his body, it'll give it weight enough to hold him down so he's not going to be wiggling. And usually before I do this, I will put the butterfly in a plastic enclosure and put him in the refrigerator for 15 minutes or so to slow down his metabolism, so he's not quite so wigged out when you hold him down with a coat hanger. So you've got him lassoed, and you cut off the damaged part of the wings with a pair of sharp scissors, and it doesn't hurt them. It's not got any nerve endings in it. It's like cutting your nails. So the butterfly isn't going to be hurt by you cutting off his wings. So you cut them down and take the damaged part off. This is a different butterfly, but same procedure. So you cut it down to where there's no more damaged part, and then you take your new wing and you cut it to match, but leaving it about 1/8 of an inch longer so you have someplace to glue. Using a toothpick, you take some super glue or contact cement and you spread just a little bit of it just above the cut edge, and then slide your new wing up so that the veins match. Then take some cornstarch on a Q-tip and just dab it so that if you've got any glue that's still exposed, he's not going to accidentally glue his wings together. It looks sort of messy, but you know, it works. And if you get it right, here is Dirk again with his 2 new wings. And yes, he does look a little messy from his cornstarch. So I took him out and put him in my garden, and he just kind of sat there most of the afternoon, and he tried a couple of times to fly, but he just couldn't get it going. But I decided just to leave him. I didn't bring him back in. I just left him on the flowers, so if he was hungry, he could nectar. And I went out the next morning, and I looked up, and he was flying laps around the butterfly garden. And I thought, he's going to be okay. I mean, this was just the coolest feeling. So there's Dirk flying laps around the butterfly garden. So I came back in just to give him plenty of flying time. And that afternoon, he was gone. He had flown away. I have no illusions that Dirk made it to Mexico with the migration, but it did give him the opportunity to have his best butterfly life. And to me, that's a real success story. You know, it was just such a cool thing to do. So there are also miscellaneous butterfly injuries. And yeah, this is Luke Skywalker, and I found him on a plant that didn't have any leaves left on it. And he was there by himself, and something had come along and pulled out his front pro leg. And he had a big drop of hemolymph on him that spread across my hand. And I thought, what am I going to do? You know, he's probably not going to make it. He's got this big hole in his side, but I couldn't just leave him. So I took him inside with the other caterpillars and put him in a place by himself with lots of milkweed. And he sat there for at least 24 hours and didn't even move. Then about the next day, he started eating, and he ate and he ate and he ate, and he grew. And he pupated and he eclosed, and he was perfect. So the other thing I tell people to remember is that not all monarchs are created equal. These are both perfectly healthy monarch chrysalids. But the one on the right, this was Pixie. I remember her distinctly because she started to pupate when she was only in a 4th instar. And I told her to get down off the top of the enclosure and go back and eat until she was a 5th instar. And, you know, butterflies are kind of like husbands, they don't listen. So she went and did her own thing, and she came out into the tiniest little chrysalis I have ever seen. It was no bigger than a jelly bean. But sure enough, she eclosed into a perfectly beautiful, albeit very tiny little butterfly. That's her on the left next to one of her normal sized butterflies on the right. So the point of all of these silly stories is that you never give up. You give them every chance, every opportunity. Besides, it's such a good experience for you, and it's such a positive thing. It can make you feel better, I think, than anything else to know what you've been through with this butterfly, and then you take it outside and it flies away. And it's just the best feeling in the world. So that's the kind of miracles that sometimes happen. And I encourage everybody, like I said, to give them every chance. If you have a group that would like to have this program, you know where to find me on the website. If you just send me a private message, I will schedule whatever it is that you need. Also, if anybody who watches this needs some seed, you can get my contact information from Steve, or you can, again, contact me via the Facebook page, and I can send you seed for either common milkweed or the hairy balls, because those are the two that I do really well with. And I've got tons of seed this year. So I think that's it. Oh, here's my regular contact information. I do have my own website, and there are tips and hints on there, as well as some interesting books you can read that are available on Amazon. And I didn't put very much on it this year because I didn't raise very many butterflies, but it's always a good place to look for information and get resources. So that's it for me. Wow, 7:57.
Perfect timing. Thanks so much, Jeannie.